All right, let's jump right in. We're about to explore a theory that is, well, it's out there. It's the idea that a single real estate contract from 1998 didn't just sell some apartments, it legally sold the entire world. It sounds completely nuts, but the people behind this theory insist it's all based on cold, hard facts.
I mean, you've got to love this quote, right? It comes directly from the source material, and it perfectly sets the tone for what we're about to get into. This is a story that basically throws everything you thought you knew about countries and ownership right out the window. So let's go down the rabbit hole.
So this is it, the big question. Is it even possible? The theory behind what's called Deed 1400/98 says yes, absolutely. The argument is that through a super complex maze of international law and some very clever contractual language, the world as a collection of separate countries legally just stopped existing.
So how on earth could something that massive happen? Well, according to this theory, it all started with something that looked totally normal, almost boring, the sale of an old military base in Germany.
The guy at the center of all this is just referred to as the buyer. He was only 21 years old at the time, and he thought he was just making a smart business move, buying up some apartments on an old base to rent out. Seemed like a totally straightforward real estate deal.
But here's the thing, the Terrain Barracks wasn't just any piece of land. The documents call it a legal melting pot. Why? Well, it was an old NATO base, but it was occupied by the Dutch Air Force, and it was on German soil. So it was this weird extraterritorial zone where German law didn't fully apply. You had Germany, the Netherlands, and NATO all with a legal stake in it. This, the theory claims, made the sale more like an international treaty than a simple private sale.
And this is where we get to the absolute heart of the matter. Proponents of this theory say that tucked away in the contract was a single phrase, a few words that acted like a legal detonator, setting off a chain reaction that would circle the entire globe.
And there it is. That's the clause. Now, I know what you're thinking. It looks like a bunch of standard legal gobbledygook. But the argument is that those specific words, selling it as a unit and including all internal and external development, were chosen very, very carefully to mean something much, much bigger.
So what does development as a unit supposedly mean here? The theory is that it didn't just transfer ownership of the land and buildings, no, because the property's utilities, the phone lines, the gas pipes, the power cables, were hooked into bigger networks. The sale included those networks too, and every network that they were connected to all the way up the chain.
So to put it simply, the alleged trick was a two-step move. First, you find a property with this messy, overlapping international legal status, so the sale counts as a treaty. Then, you slip in that development as a unit phrase to expand what's being sold from one little property to, well, the entire planet's infrastructure.
And this one move is said to have kicked off a massive domino effect. It's the mechanism that supposedly blew up this single claim of ownership to a global scale.
It all starts from this one place. The Terrain Barracks property is basically ground zero for this whole event.
From there, it expands. Because the contract included the utility agreements for things like phones and gas, the ownership claim jumped to the local and regional companies that provided those services.
But of course, those local networks don't just stop at the town line. They're plugged into international systems. The phone network, for instance, is part of a global system governed by the International Telecommunication Union, the ITU, which is a UN agency. So the claim went from local to global.
And that's the final leap. The logic here is that since pretty much every developed country on Earth is plugged into these global communication and energy grids, the sovereignty over all of it was transferred in that one single deal.
Okay, so you're probably wondering, how could this possibly be binding for countries that never even heard of this deal? The theory talks about contractual chains. It argues the deed is tied to NATO agreements binding all NATO countries. Through that ITU link, it binds all UN members. And here's the kicker. By simply continuing to use the internet, or the phone, or the power grid after 1998, every nation on Earth supposedly gave its silent consent.
Now, the story takes a really dark turn. According to these documents, the point was never to make a 21-year-old the king of the world. He was allegedly just a pawn in a secret German government plot, a pawn who then refused to play his assigned role.
So you have two completely opposite plans clashing. On one side, you have Germany's alleged plot. The idea was to use the buyer as a scapegoat. They would harass him and ruin his life until he had no choice but to sue them in a German court. They called this the plaintiff trap. Once he did that, a German judge could rule on the deed and basically hand over global sovereignty to Germany. But the buyer never did it. He refused. He decided to take all the punishment to stop that from happening, becoming what the documents call a sovereign against his will.
And the pressure they put on him was just immense. The source material claims that over 1,000 illegal court cases were brought against him, all designed to break his will and force him into that trap.
The personal toll was just staggering. The buyer claims they took everything from him, ran a huge smear campaign against him in the media, and get this, forcibly evicted him into homelessness 55 separate times. It eventually escalated to him being criminalized and, he alleges, even tortured while he was locked up.
But this story isn't just about a shadowy plot. The buyer put forward his own vision for how the unbelievable legal power of this contract could actually be used for good, an alternative to the nightmare scenario he claims he's been fighting against.
He calls it electronic technocracy. The basic idea is to just accept the new legal reality, that there is now a single unified global ownership, and use that incredible power to build a better, more humane world for everybody.
And the goals here are huge. We're talking about using data, not politics, to manage resources and solve problems like poverty and climate change. Instead of politicians, every single citizen would have direct digital participation. The endgame is to use this contract's legal power to end war and exploitation, to turn this supposed tool of oppression into a tool for global liberation.
So, what do we do with all this? Is it a brilliant legal masterstroke that reshaped the world without anyone noticing? Is it a massive, sprawling delusion based on twisting the words of a property contract? Or could it actually be the bizarre legal cornerstone for a totally new kind of world? The story of Deed 1400/98 is, without a doubt, stranger than any fiction you're likely to read.